Okay. Hey everyone, my name is Taylor Wickham, and as you can tell, I was not quite brave enough to present in person. My project is titled How the Divine Comedy Was Indicative of the Shift from the Medieval to the Renaissance. There's going to be a lot of context and background information through this presentation, so just bear with me as we kind of go through this. Alright, so to begin, what is the Divine Comedy? Translated from the Italian La Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy was a narrative poem that followed Dante through his journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Completed just 1 year before Alighieri's death, the book's first form was in manuscript form. Because the Gutenberg press wasn't invented until the mid-15th century, the poem didn't see print until 1472. Keep this intermittent period in mind, as it will be relevant later in the presentation. The next bit of background will be the understanding of the time periods of when the book was written versus when it actually saw print. The medieval period was defined by controversy, famine, and Catholic rule. The medieval period, or the Middle Ages, fell between the 5th and 15th century. With the poem being written towards the end, art such as the one depicted to the right aimed to illustrate divinity and illustrate religious dominance. Which leads us into the period that the book saw print, the Italian Renaissance. The Renaissance, a French term for rebirth, was a period of significant historical, social, cultural, and artistic rebirth. Scientific findings and a new appreciation of the humanities and philosophy allowed artists and authors to explore realms previously restricted to the Catholic Church, which segues nicely into one of the most prevalent ideologies of the time, humanism. Humanism is the outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to humanity rather than the divine or supernatural matters. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings, emphasizing human needs, and sought rational ways of solving human problems. Finally, this context brings us to my thesis, which is that the Divine Comedy, regardless of being written in the 14th century, was a precursor for themes prevalent in the Italian Renaissance. The woodcut prints involved in the first iterations of the book allowed new artists a bridge to cross over into the Renaissance period. So, the question: how did the Divine Comedy bridge the gap between medievalism and Renaissance humanism? So, well, as with everything, timing is always key. The book is unique due to its intermittent period between the invention of the Gutenberg press and its original manuscript edition. In a sense, the book was able to write to themes of both periods, which kind of takes us to the next point, which is that the story of the Divine Comedy writes to both eras. By following Dante, the story sets the groundwork in the inverse of previously acclaimed literature. The struggle is of man versus divinity, whereas in older texts it is the reverse, with the divine inflicting their power over humanity. This isn't to say, however, that Christianity was underplayed as a major force throughout the story. So how did the Renaissance artists interpret this subtle time shift between the original writing and its print date? The question arose, what would the artwork have looked like if the print date was the same as the writing date? And what gray area did these artists use to portray these newfound ideologies once the book actually saw print? But before we answer these questions, again, we have to look at how the art was produced. A highly used form of producing mass-produced artwork for printing came from the woodcut. Woodcuts are defined as a primitive type made from a design cut into a block of wood, formerly widely used for illustrations in books. We can see in early prints of the Divine Comedy the prevalence of these woodcuts. So here's where the thesis really starts to emerge. The woodcut images to the right are from the early printed version editions of the Divine Comedy. Here, and especially in the top right, the reader can see Dante as the focal point to the image. This centralization is achieved through the vivid colors that were applied after the original woodcut press, which you can see in the characterization, both red and green. So what about the artist? Antonio Manetti was one of the such artists responsible for early woodcut in the first few editions of the book. Being born in 1423, Manetti was deep into the heart of the humanist movement. These same type of people are the focus for my study due to their ability to interpret the book and spin their artwork accordingly to fit the ideologies prevalent in the Renaissance. So the next question: how would this art have differed if this book saw publication when it was written versus when it actually was published? The piece on the left is a traditional medieval piece, where the one on the right shows Dante from the humanist period. Again, we're focusing on focal points. On one hand, a divine figure is the center, and on the other, it's the human form. So this leads to the most ambiguous piece of my research, which revolves around speculating what the art could have looked like if it saw print during the time period it was written. My argument would have been that if the artists were given the opportunity to illustrate during the medieval, the depictions would revolve heavily around divine figures more than Dante himself. And we could see the kind of different examples of artwork. But so why does any of this matter? If we've learned anything throughout this class, is that when we analyze a book, a holistic approach is best. By understanding how artists were able to modify the content of the story to match their own ideology through their artwork allows the reader to assess the context of the story. So a perfect example of how the mismatched timelines affect this book is how the audience perceives things. Here we can look at how these illustrations affected the audience. For some that were illiterate at the time of the printing, these illustrations could have been the only accessible interactions that these people had. Humanist images that embolden humanism, which may not have been Dante's original intent. So the second example could be how artist depictions affect authorial intent. While we as scholars may never know Alighieri's true intent, at least in regards to what artwork made it into his book, we can see how simple illustrations or marginalia can change entire themes within literature, so which could have may or may not have been what he was going for. So, in summary, the intermittent period of the Divine Comedy should be studied as an important building block to what impact this book had on early readers, especially the readers of publication. In this sense, the artist may have had just as much of an impact on the audience as the words in the text itself. So, finally, some minor takeaways to not only my research, but for the whole class pertaining to how we as readers go about studying books. My research can honestly be described as a study of procedure behind evaluating books. Taking a holistic approach, even going as far as looking at timelines and artwork, allows better understanding of the book as a whole, which is kind of what we're doing. So, in my last slide, I just want to take the time to thank Dr. Avo and my other classmates. This class has been a breath of fresh air in relation to other English courses that have focused so much on the text itself. So I'll yield the rest of my time for questions or the next speaker. So thanks for bearing with me, guys.